This is my first time.
This is your first time?
I've done some Zoom recordings, but never on the GritFit series.
Oh, wow.
You are my
Wow.
first.
Oh. The V card.
Thirsty Fighter here, bringing you a GritFit series, which is all about how people go through significant trauma in their life and not only survive through it, but thrive in spite of it. My first interview is with an amazing man who barely in his 30s has competed in multiple sports, from football to wrestling to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The man has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Aconcagua. He has started his own business. He's been interviewed by Oprah. The man is amazing, and he wrote a book called No Excuses. And when you see the interview, you'll know why.
So I'm completely honored and stoked because I've got Kyle Maynard here. You're what, young 30s? You're like 29, forever 29?
23, 24, not 34.
34. Yeah. And you've already accomplished some spectacular things that people haven't had a chance in their life to ever do. And you inspire so many people by all of the grit and that you have to and drive to accomplish all of these things that you put in front of you. You know, you put these things in front of you, right? And you just go after them. And I know that there's a lot of things that are very challenging to anyone accomplishing those types of things. And for people that don't know, if you can explain where some of your challenges lie and how you're able to overcome some of them.
I was born a quad amputee, and basically my arms end at the elbows and legs end at the knees. And it was really haven't known any other way since I was born, and instantly happened to be born at Walter Reed Army Hospital. My dad was in the military, which is kind of one of the main hospitals where so many of our veterans come back home and do rehabilitation after they've had an injury. And it didn't have anything to do with the fact that I was going to be born an amputee. My mom and dad didn't know. And so they had no idea, kind of before some of the things that you mentioned, before any mountains or wrestling or jiu-jitsu, any of that, there was really just the attitude of trying to make things as normal as possible and try to just help me figure out how to, do things, whether it was like picking up a spoon, and had to drop it 1,000 times just over and over and over and over again to try to figure it out. For me, this, when I pick this up, right, then that's the only way that I've ever done that. So in a way it helps me, because I don't know any other way. I don't know any other difference. So I think, one of the things my family taught me growing up was that everybody has a disability. It's probably one of the main things that unites every single person on the planet. It's just 99.9% of the time, I can't look at you and see yours. I happen to know, through some of your story that you shared with me too, of like your journey that you've been through, it's amazing. And like the story that you shared with me yesterday, now, like it has me, look at you in a different light, right? Like, it's just like, sometimes I think we forget that each person is going through their own thing.
The reality of what you can see and what you can't see in terms of somebody's challenges and dynamics. Then there's also the equalizer. The equalizer is what keeps the movement, what keeps you going forward, what keeps any of us going forward. The first 35 wrestling matches, right? You lost. Am I getting this right? You lost your first 35, and then in your senior year, you won 35.
Yeah, right.
But those first 35, I compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that thought process of 35 matches and losing 35 matches and continuing to go through that kind of training. One of the things that we talk a lot about is you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I think it's a requisite if you're going to be in a combat sport for sure.
Right. Like what were you drawing from during those first 35 matches? What was it that was saying, no, I'm going back on the mat. No, I'm going back on the mat. No, I'm going back on the mat.
The honest answer is because I had to. Yeah, my mom and dad refused to let me quit in the middle of the season. And I sometimes speculate and wonder like what path life would have taken if I hadn't won a match my second year. I lost every match my first season, and then second season was when I won my first match. And like sometimes, like, you know, as a thought experiment with talking to my friends, I'm like, yeah, I wonder like what would have happened if I hadn't won that year, you know. Like I was kind of really into computers and video games and a bit nerdy in that regard. Maybe would have gone like a different route, you know, with that, maybe like gotten into programming or something. So it's fascinating, you know, that like the way that fate, you know, whatever destiny, whatever word we want to go and put in its place, kind of like works, that like I happened to win that match that second season, and it completely altered and changed the belief in me. And by the time I was in 8th grade, then I was actually won my region championship. So went from like being really, really bad to actually like, you know, winning a regional tournament and getting to go to the state tournament. And then, you know, high school got to wrestle on one of the best teams in the Southeast.
Something else that's up in our gym that I go to at Team Octopus under Team Roberta Travin is iron sharpens iron. Another big piece of it when you're talking about your family, your parents, that push, that they too are warriors in a sense, because they have instilled that in you.
Oh, for sure. There was my dad, his style was more of like, he wanted to be more of a finesse wrestler, and kind of, you know, just more to focus on speed and technique and things like that, instead of like the brute force. And my mom was more of the bruiser mentality. Like she told me one time, she said, like, if you put people in enough pain with you on the mat, they'll find a way out. And I was like, you know what, actually, like, that's kind of true. Like there was moments where I had a move that my coach helped me come up with called the jawbreaker. And, you know, just basically just do like a front headlock and grab a hold of the jawline and pull and squeeze that. And, you know, like it was borderline legal.
Borderline.
And so, you know, probably that would be kind of my mentality. It's like a little bit of both, you know, like there's like moments where like I try to focus on the finesse and try to focus on like the finer techniques and all that. And then there are other moments where I knew like, all right, like I'm on a single leg, like I just have to like hold on to this with everything that I have, or, you know, like if like I get a hold of somebody's head, like be able to ride somebody's head and just hold on with everything I have. And, you know, so I guess it's like, it's a bit of both, but they for sure have that, like that spirit in themselves. My dad was a wrestler, football player, and an Army veteran too. He's a military police officer. And that, you know, was, he definitely instilled like that spirit in me from, you know, a younger age. Can't say that I've always, you know, adopted it, right? Like, one of the things that people I think kind of misunderstand about me too is I'm like extraordinarily lazy. So I don't know, I guess it's like what I'm trying to say there too, in terms of like what you said with like the idea of like the equalizer. Like to me, that's just having like a blend of different things and different styles, being able to go and turn things on when you need to, be able to shut it off when you don't need to. And I mean, I loved wrestling. Wrestling was always my base, my foundation was you know, super important to me. But the transition into jiu-jitsu, to realize it was like a whole new dimension. And like, you know, because like in wrestling, you can't go to your back and get pinned.
Right.
In jiu-jitsu, like, right, like we learn how to go and fight from our back, and like you can actually be incredibly dangerous from your back. And it took me a long time to learn how to like pull guard and,
Mm.
to do that. But when it did, it was like a whole new dimension that opens up, and like so many different possibilities become, available. So it's a like truly like infinite sport.
The combination of being able to have different backgrounds and different styles, but also the challenges, like when we were talking about, for example, like the specific injury, my most recent injury with the shoulder, and being able to, having to work differently than
Yeah.
what I did previously. I couldn't do the same things. And so how do I modify for some window of time to compensate for that? And then now I'm going into a competitive situation when I'm not doing all these things that I've learned all along. I mean, I have some of that, of course, as my, my base, but I have to modify certain things. And it is that, does anybody really need to, it's forefront of my mind, but it's not necessarily forefront of somebody else's mind.
The modifications.
Once you get going.
Yeah.
Once the match starts.
Yeah.
And you're rolling, all of a sudden you're in that role. It's not
Right.
like I'm compensating this way and this one's compensating. No, you just
going.
You're just in that role, and that moment is so pure. And I love that piece of it, because it's within that moment where we're all in an equal foothold and just trying to support each other and progress. So I'm.
What's interesting you said was sort of the equal foothold. Like, I mean, do you feel like though that the disadvantage that you went into the match with made you better in some way? Like, what created the equality?
The equality to me, when I was able to recognize that the other individual doesn't have all of the understanding of where I'm compensating. They don't have that top of mind. I have that top of mind. So I have to change my mindset with how I'm approaching things.
Huh.
It's about the mindset going into it. We are in this world here,
right,
inside the bottom. We're not able to look out on the outside of the label. We're always looking on the inside of the label. There's a book by Dr. Ernesto Spinelli, and it's called Unknowing. Knowing. And he's a therapist, and he tells these stories, existential therapy, of these 8 patients. And in an overarching way, he talks about the therapeutic environment where you have all of this knowledge, all of this understanding that you've gathered over such a long period of time. And then when you're meeting somebody, you can make, within the first few minutes, you're like, yeah, I know what's going on with this one. I've got a diagnosis, because you're packed with all of this knowledge and years of experience that you automatically make a perception, a diagnosis. And you have to unravel some of that. So you have to come from this perspective of unknowing. The knowing is there.
Yeah.
You got to bracket that off and come from this perspective. And we don't do that for ourselves.
Yeah, totally. No, it's cool that there's like a Zen concept of a beginner's mind, which kind of sounds a lot with that, right? Like that, like we would go and jump in and we drive a car for the first time, and it's like there's so many different things going on, right? And like that's why I think looking at our phone creates a distraction, and people get in an accident and people get killed, right? So it's like, like when you're first driving a car, you're like white knuckle, like, grip on that. You're going, 10 miles an hour across a parking lot, right? And then all of a sudden, like, a couple of years later is when you're like overconfident and you're like cruising on the highway, and then, like looking at your phone, and, that's when obviously bad things happen too, because you almost lost that aspect of beginner's mind.
Mm-hmm. That's a great mentality. And that's, I think, for the most successful athletes, I would think that they are in this constant state of learning. I keep coming back to jujitsu and combat sports, and you've got belts, and there's this goal, like, oh, when I get my black belt, then I'm going to
then
know
I'll be,
everything, right? Which isn't,
nope.
no, exactly, which is so not the case. It's you're going to know so much more than,
totally.
the belts beforehand. But if the mentality is constantly a one of learning and being growth oriented versus solely goal oriented, like you can have goals, but if it's only goal oriented and not growth oriented, you can be very static and only achieve, a certain portion of your total potential.
Totally. That's where, like, I mean, we kind of talked about this a little bit yesterday too, but I know one of my bigger weaknesses is the fact that, like, I'll have that, like, start, stop mentality. Like, I'm a, purple belt. I think it was awarded it in 2016, would have been after the world. It was around maybe Christmas 2015. So got my blue belt in like 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like that just, for one, from blue to purple to take that long shouldn't have been the case. And, to, like, still be a purple belt where I'm at right now, then it's like, I could have continued to go and progress and just made those, like, little incremental changes as opposed to, like, the mentality of, like, all right, I'm doing this and I'm training for worlds, right? Like, I'm, just having that, like, obsessive mentality of training. Like, I think, to your point, you mentioned somebody like Roberto Travin, who, or my professor Andre Galvao, like, they are, like, true legitimate masters of their craft, and yet they're constantly learning. Like, they're constantly, like, adapting and building in new things into their training. And it's like, that just blows me away. Like, that's where I fell in love with it at first, was like how intricate it was, and like how, like, beautiful the sport is in that regard.
Well, I think, when you were talking about the stop start, there's lots of things that you were doing also throughout these years. So there's the beauty of the things that we have in front of us and in our lives is, some people will, for example, find a career path, and then that is the career they take with them, and they stay in that career their entire life. And some people are exploring, are literally going from trying new and different things, and have that explorer mentality. And that's what you have. You have that explorer mentality. So these waves that you ride, these undulations of, they are just picking you up into other experiences. And things are always going to be there. Jiu-jitsu is always going to be there. Climbing another mountain is always going to be there. Wrestling, things that you love or are interested in, professional development, speaking. Sometimes we do them in seasons versus lifetimes.
I appreciate you saying that. And, like, I have had friends tell me that, like, sometimes I am a little bit hard on myself, but at the same time, like, like what you're describing there is, like, my biggest excuse too. It's my biggest thing that'll let me off the hook and be like, oh yeah, jiu-jitsu is there. Like, it'll always be there. And then, then a global pandemic hits, and, like, then there's, like, no jiu-jitsu. So, but I understand what you're saying, and to appreciate that, like, there's, a friend of mine that's a CrossFit founder, like, he talked about, like, the idea behind CrossFit was, like, specialize and not specializing. And I think that's, like, a really been a really key concept to me. It's probably why I gravitated towards CrossFit in the first place, is because like, at least, I mean, it's changed and evolved a lot too. You know, it's definitely not, I would say, quite the same as it was back in the early days. I mean, it's, you know, now it's all about the CrossFit Games, and kind of being the best at that. But in the early days, like literally, like the mentality, and this is still the way that I actually just did my certification again, and the mentality that they teach is the idea of like the hopper deck. You know, being able to have, you know, 100 workouts in a hopper, you know, like a spin wheel kind of thing, whatever, right? Pick out a workout, pull it out, look at the workout, and whether, you know, you could have a 10K run, you could have a max rep deadlift, and you could go and have like a wrestling match, you know, and like the person who is able to do the best across all three is able to, you know, to be the winner. Because the specialist who goes and specializes only in like, you know, the 10K time, they might be able to smoke everybody else, but when it comes time to go and do a deadlift, then they're screwed, right? Like they might be lucky if they could do a bodyweight deadlift. And so there is a cost to specialization for sure. And, you know, it's something that like you know, I enjoy like the jack of all trades, but then, I mean, there's a trade-off with that too. There's a cost because like you do become like master of none in that way.
We have these perceptions of what we think things should be. I kind of, you know, I love evaluating where my head is at during various different phases of my life and my career and my athletics, and my passions. You know, where do things live at any given point in time? And those, you know, I would coach other people to say, for example, listen for understanding, don't listen to judge. Now I need back to applying that to myself. I constantly self-judge.
Yeah.
I should be X. I should be Y. You know, the should've, could've, would'ves are
infinite,
exactly.
Right.
And the only way I can get past those is to stop the self-judge and to release myself from that, and to allow to really listen. What is my true story? You know, we grow up and forget what it is that drives us and that gets us excited and that we're really, really good at, because we have all of these other imprints and inputs that are coming to us from all these different directions. And then they formulate kind of this concept of who you are, so that it's coming from the outside in versus from the inside out. And then everything gets all muddled. And then we have to kind of try and figure out and how to get through all that as we get older. It's crazy.
Yeah. Do you have a trick to like deal with the self-judgment, like, or like something that you do when you recognize that you're doing it, or is it just like the awareness of it?
I do. If I attach it to the thought process to something that helps me separate it from myself. So one of the ways that I do that is when I see it happening over and over again, and that negative talk, I'm faith-based. I'm a believer. So I will say, devil, get out of my mind. So I don't attack. It's no longer my thought. It's the devil that's doing that to me. So I attach it to something that's separately meaningful to me, that's negative, and is no longer my thought. Somebody else, the devil, is placing that thought in my mind. So I'll say that over and over again, and eventually it does stop that process from happening. I've used it over and over again, and it works very consistently with me.
That's really cool. I have kind of a similar kind of thing that I've gotten to do too with that. Like, there was a this is kind of a random side story, but after we climbed the mountain in South America and came down, there's a wine label there that we got to visit called El Enemigo.
Mm.
And on every wine bottle, there's like a picture of this like half man, half scorpion fighting, like, you know, whatever, like kind of this battle stance. And it says like at the end of our journey, we only remember one battle, and that was the battle within the original enemy.
Mm-hmm.
I've said too that like if I could like be born again, and you know, would I be born into the same body? I don't know. I mean, like, you know, I'm so grateful for the experiences and the lessons that I've learned from it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I don't know if any of us would necessarily choose the things that we're challenged with.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes it's like, no, like this is just chosen for you. Like you were born into your body, you have your challenges and those things, you know, and it's like I have mine, and you know, then I think what we do with it though is a significant thing, and something I've tried to rack my brain around of like helping other people in different ways. And so, you know, like how do we best do that? Because it can go to the extent where like it can be too much. When I was a kid, if my mom and dad helped feed me forever, I never would have learned how to do it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and in wrestling or jiu-jitsu, like you're out there all alone.
Yeah.
You and your opponent. That's it. Like everybody else can watch, they can cheer you on, you know, they can offer, you know, that moral support, encouragement, you know, but you're out there, and like you have to be the one to be able to make it happen. And which is partly why it's such a, you know, special sport. Like coming from a football background, I didn't have control over what the quarterback did. I was a nose guard, you know, and I was a backup nose guard in our C team, you know, so, but I didn't have control over what the running back did. I didn't have control over what the wide receiver did.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if they were, you know, like giving their best effort, or they could have done more, they could have done this or whatever. In jiu-jitsu, like wrestling, like, you know, and you got to live with it, you know, whether or not. And sometimes there's so many factors that play into that too, like going into the, you know, the worlds and things like that. I remember being like so like nervous and which really definitely kind of messed me up, maybe more like, you know, it didn't open up and be as offensive as it could be. And so it's super fascinating, all of the different factors that go into that.
You know, would like to touch on, as you were talking about, you know, competing and doing these things that raise anxiety or fear and all of these variables that come into play. When you were climbing these mountains that take days upon days upon days, and steep and rock falls and just incredibly dangerous dynamics that are going on. It's not like, okay, I'm going to have the most intense 5-minute match and it's over.
Yeah, right.
And then, you know, 15 minutes later, I'll have another one. And maybe 2 hours later, I'll have another one after that. And another one after that. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I'm done. But this is day upon day, hour after hour. You know, if you could touch on when you were at your weakest moment during either of those climbs, what were you drawing on during that time? Where were you? Where was your head?
Incidentally, so I'd say it was first climb, we were on the mountain for 12 days. The second, Aconcagua, there's other mountains in between. I'm talking about the big ones. So Kilimanjaro and Aconcagua. Kilimanjaro, we were on the mountain for 12 days. Aconcagua, 17 days. On the fourth day of both climbs was when I was like in my tent in tears and just like heartbroken and be like basically convinced I was going to tell my guide like that that I was done. And the fifth morning, both times. In fact, the fourth morning fourth night on Aconcagua, my resting heart rate was like beating through my chest.
Jeez.
And I felt like, I had a feeling that night that like, if I went to sleep, then I wouldn't wake up and I wouldn't see the sunlight. So just like,
Wow.
when I saw the sun in the fifth morning, then I was like, wow, this is beautiful. And so like, I'm alive, and again, like that was just a really kind of special feeling. So, but then both days I was convinced I was going to quit. And that instantly on Aconcagua, that where we were camped out on the fourth night was right at the helicopter landing pad. And so it was the highest landing pad that they had. And we'd heard the helicopter going around and looking for other lost climbers. And, it knew that there was significant risk if I continued to go and go forward. And, but instead of quitting there, I still, even on the fifth day, I didn't make my final decision. I just was like, all right, I'm going to rest a day, see how I feel. If I wake up at the sixth morning and I still feel the same, then I'm going to take the helicopter out, because I'm like, no amount of, anything is worth that if it's going to cost me my life, like, to go and do this. Like, it's just silly. So, but then I woke up the sixth morning and I felt good. And I thought, you know what, I can do this.
That's just, and you had so many days ahead of you. Again, it was like, okay, no, I go from, like a breaking point, not till, well, there's only one more day. I can hang in one more day or one more hour.
Yeah.
You're going from a breaking point to knowing you have a long journey ahead of you after feeling what you're feeling. There's just,
it was cool though, is realizing that, like, even in sharing this, like, I was kind of surprised at what happened when I was there, but like, in reflecting on it, it's even like weirder. It was like, as we kept going, I felt stronger. So I was also too probably my fattest that I've ever been. I was like 170 pounds.
Really? When you're
Yeah.
climbing? I thought you would be like leaned out for.
No, I had an intuition. Like, it was mostly a convenient excuse that I'm like, to just eat whatever going into it, that I'm like, okay, so like the difference between jiu-jitsu, as you mentioned, in a 5-6 minute match and a mountain is, like, the mountain, I knew that I was going to need more stored up energy. And so I was like, you know what, screw it. Like, if I'm a little extra, fluff for the trip, then that'll be all right. And I ended up, my training too, like I slacked and I didn't train like I could have. I did, though, however, slept in an altitude tent for almost like 6 weeks or 8 weeks before I left. And that made an enormous difference. I think without that altitude tent, like, I might have died. It was, or at least there would have been no summit. Like every factor conspired to allow the summit to occur. Like, and even the weather. Like, we had the most beautiful summit day of, our guide said 20 plus years of guiding on the mountain happened to be our summit day. I'm like,
that's spectacular.
Yeah. So, like,
meant to be, that's a God thing. Like, that's like,
it is absolutely, for sure.
Serving it for you. Wow.
And like, I can't deny it. Like, and I felt a really special God moment. My guide happened to like carry with him a snack that my grandma carried in her purse for like my whole, life. And like, when he pulled that out, I was like, whoa.
Wow.
And then seeing the peak, and or like, we were seeing the world from the peak. It was remarkable. On the summit, there were maybe 10 of us, and it was outside of the climbing season in the Himalaya. So we were arguably the 10 highest, people in the world at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I stripped down to go to the bathroom on the summit. And so like I, at one moment got to like be like the highest naked person on earth.
Goals.
Goals.
I've got a new goal. When I talk about grit and the way you are delivering on that, that's what, to me, GritFit is it's not just surviving. It's not just driving. It's thriving when everything is pushing against you, when your head is down and you've got shoulder pressure, or you're just face in the dirt and it's one step in front of the other, but you're driven to take that next step versus just say, I'm good. Even when, I know we started the conversation with iron sharpens iron and your parents, and I know how close you were with your grandmother, and from what I've read, and but have you had others around you that have also said, Kyle, I don't know if you should do this. Yeah, let's head back. Or, I don't want you to try this.
For sure. There's been a lot of that over the years, for sure. And I think sometimes, people are right. Like, I think, one of like my kind of personal liabilities sometimes might be like the risk I go and take, like my risk assessment with like the virus, for instance, right? Like I'm thinking, I'm like, oh, I'm 34 years old. I can, like whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like I'll be fine. And, but then at the same time, like it impacts all of the people around me. Mm-hmm. It's not just my decisions for myself. It's like, it's all like the people around me. I think it's a double-edged sword. Like you mentioned, sometimes like on Aconcagua, I think there were alternate realities and dimensions where I didn't make it.
Mm.
And, and that it occurs, many, many times for different people for different reasons that like, that you don't make it. I mean, there was a guy, 24 hours ahead of us that 900 feet below the summit had a stroke, fell over, hit his head, died. And they had just brought his body down right before we got there. And like talk about psychological warfare when I was sitting in that spot where he had died, and I'm thinking like that, like I was literally like shivering uncontrollably in my, bar that I was eating, like I dropped some of the dirt, and like, still this like the hardest part of the day left to go. Yeah, it was like questioning like whether or not like it'd be too far.
That's always a challenge with somebody that's so physically driven like you are, athletically driven, and balancing the difference between what's okay and what's not okay. When can you push past something, and when have you pushed too far? Like it's, that line that we walk with that physical push and what that looks like. And you were in that moment at that very time.
Right. I mean, that's where like also like to take it back to jiu-jitsu, it's like that. I told you yesterday when I moved to Atos and I was training there, in this like room of killers, like I didn't submit anybody for 6 months. I think maybe you got 1 or 2 submissions or something like that. Like it was a really, really, really long time. And like most of my time training was spent with them wrapped around my neck. And, I you know, like several times, like I had it maybe 2 or 3 times before in training where like I went out, and like a couple times there, like I went out and like, you know, it's that same kind of fine line that you're talking about there. It's like, when's it okay to like, you know, hold on and go through something, and when is it not? Because it's when somebody's got, you know, a triangle wrapped around your neck and you're trying your best to go and squeeze out of it, like, you know, if you don't tap, eventually you do go out.
Right. Yeah.
And it's I think definitely like it taught me that lesson of like pushing that line, but like also respecting the fact that like it's important to like live to fight another day. And you know, when I was in that losing streak, one of the things that really helped me was we revised the goal. The goal initially was I would win a match, and then my dad kind of quickly realized that wasn't going to happen, and so the goal then became to not be pinned. And but like many times in that first year, I was just bridging off my back and you know, stuck and like feeling like, you know, just like that there was kind of no way out, but then like managed to keep that goal, and we kept that goal all throughout, you know, the wrestling career. But then, you know, going into jiu-jitsu, it kind of made it even that much tougher to be able to trust going to my back.
Yeah.
And it was eventually when I developed that trust to be able to like go to my back that I was able to learn and kind of advance the game a whole lot, especially Paul Creighton, my jiu-jitsu coach in Atlanta, really helped me develop my game off my back and my guard, doing, you know, short arm bars and like the deep half we worked on a ton. So like the deep half guard is by far my favorite. So I don't want to give away all the secrets for when we get to roll sometime, but
just tell me. I won't.
Right. Yeah. Nobody else will see.
Nobody else will see.
Cool. I geek out a lot on like the like psychology and philosophy and all that stuff. I know yesterday I was like, when we started going deep on some of these conversations, I was like, wow, it's really cool. Like you opened my mind up to like a totally different concept that I never really like thought of before. And you know, it's fun in that way. Like I never really kind of made me look at knowledge in a new way, if that makes sense. It's like, if like, you know, there's tons of stuff from like, you know, listening to like podcasts or, you know, whatever, audiobooks, all that stuff that's like buried deep down in there, but like without like a sparring partner to go and like pull it out, then like it,
exactly,
you know, they get stuck. I'm like, wow. So just really kind of cool, like inside of this, I've never really experienced that before. Somebody says something that just like triggers your thought to go in a totally different direction. Like it's just very bizarre, like how that works. Like I don't know, it's, I mean, probably topic for another conversation, to just consciousness in general and like the mystery of that. Like it's just really wild.
Well, it's definitely another potential conversation for us to have if you're down for it.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love it. You know, jiu-jitsu consciousness, don't threaten me with a good time.
Right, exactly.
Wow, what an interview. And when Kyle said that we would not choose the things that we are challenged with, but it's what we do with it that is so significant. And in 2020, that statement could not be any more relevant. So let's rise up and be a thirsty fighter. Thirsty Fighter here, bringing you a GritFit series, which is all about how people go through significant trauma in their lives, like inhaling your own hair.